Hello, and welcome to our webinar, Talent Marketing Trends, Looking Back and Moving Forward. My name is Colleen Noggle, and on behalf of the team at Symphony Talent, thank you so much for joining us today. Please feel free to invite your colleagues. It's not too late to join, and if they can't make it live, this webinar will be recorded and will be available on demand shortly after the session. As always, this is an interactive event, so please submit your questions and feedback by using the Q&A feature on Zoom. You can do this at any time during the session, and then at the end, we'll provide as many responses as time allows. We also encourage you to join the conversation on Twitter using the hashtag Talent Marketing. And if you're in a conference room with your colleagues, give us a shout on Twitter and tag at @SymphonyTalent_ and at @Talk2ARP. Please let us know that you're there. And with that, I'm excited to introduce our speakers for this webinar. Our first speaker is Madeline Lorano, co-founder and chief research officer for Aptitude Research Partners. Madeline's primary focus over the last 12 plus years has been on the talent management market, specializing in talent acquisition. Over the years, she has watched the space transform from a back office function to a strategic company initiative with a focus on partnerships, experience, and efficiency. Next up on our panel is Shannon Seary. Shannon is the VP of Strategy for Symphony Talent and leads the strategic insights and content marketing teams as they develop and deliver omni-channel recruitment marketing strategies that connect companies to talent. Shannon has spent 18 years in digital marketing, web development, and specializes in helping clients leverage mobile and social media to communicate employer brands, interact with candidates, and engage employees. Thank you both for joining us. And with that, Madeline, I'll hand it over to you. Please take it from here.
Thank you so much, Colleen. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for a topic and discussion that I have been really looking forward to for the past few weeks. It's an exciting time here for many reasons at the end of the year in December. And one of those reasons is that we get to look back at the past year and think about what's worked, what hasn't worked in terms of talent acquisition and talent marketing. And then we get to look ahead and get excited and think about the opportunities we have for the future. And I'm thrilled to be here with Shannon today to talk to you about what we're seeing in talent marketing, why this is an area that promises so many opportunities for talent acquisition professionals. And we're going to talk about a few things here. We're going to talk about the current state of talent acquisition technology. It has been quite a year. Shannon, I know you can relate with all of the changes that have happened in this market. This is an amazing industry to be in. We are, I think, also fortunate to be covering the space and to be practitioners and companies in this space. Shannon, I know you can relate to those feelings of excitement this year.
Yep, absolutely.
And we're going to talk about some key trends, what we should think about in terms of what the new year might bring, and also what you might not need to be so concerned with.
Yep.
And then finally, we're going to leave you with some future trends and predictions.
Great. Cool. Let's go ahead and jump right in.
Yeah, it's been a big year. And I think one of the things that I've noticed, Shannon, we've talked a lot about this, is a real shift in talent acquisition becoming a business priority. Right. Not something that every company has done for years and years, something that CEOs and C-level executives are certainly paying attention to. And this is research that was done by PwC, and it's not research that was done for HR professionals, not research that was done for talent acquisition leaders. They surveyed CEOs, and they found that 77% of CEOs said that the availability of talent is the greatest threat to their organization. And 60% of those CEOs are rethinking their technology. Yep. Shannon, I know that's something that impacts you on a daily basis, is thinking about having these conversations elevated all the way up to the C-level.
Absolutely. I mean, as part of Symphony Talent, these are the types of solutions that we offer to our clients. And so we're having these discussions every day. And, truly what we're seeing is just as so many of the talent acquisition processes, HR tech, talent acquisition tech specifically, very much have kind of been built on an infrastructure that's that's aging right now in terms of its point of view, that it's really been designed with kind of human resources, specifically compliance. They haven't really been built in terms of, what our expectations today are as candidates and even just as consumers and the digital transformation that's happening. So, we absolutely, this is one of the things that is on the minds of all of our clients, how do we rethink our technology to make sure that we're providing a mobile, a personalized, a seamless candidate experience, but not just a candidate experience. And I know we'll talk about this as we go on in the webinar today, but also as our candidates are hired and we're onboarding them and we're trying to have them be engaged employees and hopefully actually brand advocates. How can we make sure that our technology is really paving the way to ensure that that's happening in a really smart and seamless kind of way?
Much different than just putting butts in seats, which is what talent often taught to do for years and years. So it's exciting, new opportunities and new ways to get visibility in the organization. So with this new focus and pressure from the C-suite, there's also new pressures that talent acquisition is facing. Not just this increased pressure from the business to align with these strategies. I mean, you talk about candidate experience, but also anything a company is going to go through in terms of a new product launch, a merger or an acquisition, a relocation, any of these big business decisions that happen, talent is a huge factor in that. And companies are thinking about that. I mean, I think the perfect example that's so relevant right now is Amazon's second headquarters. How does that impact talent acquisition? And that's a big part of those conversations.
Yeah.
Other trends.
Yeah, no, agreed, please.
Other trends too, and Shannon, I know that's something that you think a lot about too at Symphony, is the gig economy, is this emergence of a flexible workforce. And how do we expand our view of talent beyond just external talent and beyond just full-time employees?
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, we're seeing such a change in today's workers in terms of how they're thinking about their careers, how they're thinking about jobs. People are staying with companies for a much shorter amount of time. There's definitely a trend in the industry and with our overall client base of where they're starting to think of today's workers. Really, everybody is kind of part of a contingent workforce. They're not staying at the companies for years and years. And so for candidates and the folks that are on board today, they're really choosing the jobs and the opportunities for them that are going to help prepare them for their next role, that's going to develop them to more where they want to get. Very much a stepping stone, kind of approach. And so, I mean, really what happens with that is just we continue to have to struggle with how do we engage the employees that we have and kind of meet their needs while they're also meeting our needs. But also that it means the talent acquisition is going to continue to get busier, right? They'll continuously have to make sure that they're choosing the right technology, they're telling the right story in the most efficient and relevant way possible. It's becoming even more urgent because of the gig economy, and they absolutely have the increasing business pressure that's coming from within their own business. But I also just think that the overall pressure that exists in terms of our changing expectations and candidates changing expectations in terms of how they communicate and how they want to be communicated to. And I know you're about to talk a little bit too about like the transparency piece, and how can we make sure that we're not only using technology and automation and machine learning, but how can we balance that with transparency and authenticity and personalization and the things that are going to build brand trust and brand loyalty.
Exactly. And let's talk about transparency for a minute, because I think it's so important. And you talk about personalization. Candidates expect to have transparency from the companies they work for. It's not this sort of one-size-fits-all messaging that has to go out there to say, this is, we're a great place to work because of these 5 reasons. The messaging needs to be transparent and it needs to be personal and relevant, and vice versa. I think employers expect the same sort of transparency from candidates as well. And it's not a negative thing. I think for so long we thought transparency, it had a negative connotation to it. I think it's really positive because it really brings us to better hires, more quality applicants, and an overall better experience.
Absolutely. A clear understanding of what's going to motivate somebody to stay at an organization or to accept a role to begin with, as long as we've got clear expectations on both sides. I agree 100%. I mean, transparency is a good thing, and something that I know that our clients continue to kind of struggle with and make sure that they're able to balance, but also, to your point, sort of sourcing the stories from employees that really help them be transparent as an organization, and not just constantly putting marketing messages out there, but actually telling who they are as a company through the voice of their employees, and really highlighting and kind of propping up those stories. But that, to your point, it takes transparency on both sides and trust on both sides to be able to do that.
Absolutely. So new trends, we're seeing new pressure, new challenges, and we're also seeing a lot of new trends emerging in the market. And when we ask companies in the research we did this year, what strategies they're looking at, you can see it's screening candidates before they interview, supporting internal mobility efforts, communicating with candidates in a timely manner, supporting employee referral efforts with incentives. What's interesting to me about this, Shannon, and I'd love your views on it, is these aren't new phenomenons. This is not new. We're not talking about anything that's, revolutionary of, candidates and, ways that we're engaging them. This is kind of the basics. Screening in a more effective way, supporting internal mobility efforts, thinking about communicating and providing exactly what you were just talking about with the transparency and the personalization. And with companies increasing their headcount in the next year and the shrinking talent pool with this low unemployment that we have, this, I think, revisiting of the basics is something that we can't overlook when we think about trends for next year. Is we know that there's a lot of exciting possibilities. We know that there's great technology out there, but we have to understand the fundamentals of how we recruit for talent.
Yep, that's exactly the word that I was going to use, right? That the fundamentals aren't going to change. Really, what's going to change are going to be ways that we can make it more efficient, ways that we can use data to make it more personalized and a smarter process so that we can get better information out there to be able to attract more of the right folks that are going to be a match, for our specific culture, for the specific jobs from a skill set perspective. But the foundation of what it takes to actually get somebody to be interested in a company and to come work there and to hopefully stay there and move throughout their career, those aren't going to change. I think it's really just going to be the way that we make that happen. But I love that 49%, support employee referral efforts with incentives, that we're still talking about this. I've been in this space for 18 years, and we've been talking about this for all of those 18 years, whether it was something that was a process that was supported within an ATS, or there was an entire website around ERP, or whether social was something that was even a part of the discussion. We've been talking about this. So I think you're right on. It is the fundamentals.
The fundamentals. And maybe we could spend even a minute talking about, with those strategies and with those fundamentals, this idea of talent marketing. And I love when we first started talking about this, and you explained, it's not just recruitment marketing, it's talent marketing. Right. And for so long, I think we've been using the terms recruitment marketing to think about how we're going to do what we've always done, which is just to think about marketing our jobs to external talent. How do we broaden that? How do we provide an experience that extends just beyond the candidate and into what can make a really positive impact on the organization?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we have to think about our talent through their full employee life cycle. I mean, if you think about it just from the perspective of, I think the latest studies are showing 90% of employees decide whether they're going to stay at an organization or if they're going to leave within the first 6 months, right? And so when you think about talent marketing, it can't just stop at the time that you send the offer letter and they accept, right? How you then onboard that new hire, that experience that they have, which we don't, when we think about marketing, we often equate that to advertising, but it's about the experience. It's really the experience that you're creating as you're attracting somebody to the organization, you're bringing them through the recruiting process, you're then bringing them on board, you're having them have their employee experience, and then even as we're offboarding people, making sure that how we onboard and continue to engage our employees, it's absolutely vital to essentially pay off all of the work and the budget that went into to attract and hire them in the first place. Right. So when you start thinking about talent acquisition and what in marketing, we really can't stop at just recruitment marketing. Engagement starts with recruiting, absolutely, but it's got to continue consistently throughout the employee's journey with the organization. And we want to make sure that we're able to create experiences where an employee is feeling engaged with the organization, like they're assured that they made the right decision. And onboarding, for example, kind of can set the tone for that, and helping them understand how you're going to make your impact on the organization kind of day one. And a lot of that comes down to the kind of information that you can put out there from a talent marketing perspective. And I think even going further, I've been a proponent. Anybody who's heard me speak for years have said that it's about kind of making your employees become your most loyal brand advocates. And when they feel engaged in the organization and they're able to then kind of share their voices and share talent marketing information and messaging out with their colleagues because they're excited and passionate about their work, the byproduct of that is recruiting. Right, but it really starts with kind of getting your employees out there and sharing your messaging. So when we talk about talent marketing, it's really about making sure that we're creating an experience across that entire employee life cycle.
Yeah, I love that. And I think, you said something earlier that I think is so true and probably resonates with a lot of companies on this call today, is you spend so much money on that attract. You spend so much money with making sure that you're engaging with talent before they apply, nurturing talent before they apply. You can see here from the research we did, 1 in 3 companies are increasing their investments here in this attract bucket of the talent acquisition trifecta. We have to make sure that those investments don't go to waste. If you're providing such a great experience, positive communication, constant communication before somebody's even applying for a job, and then you neglect them, especially during that screening stage where they receive an offer and then they don't exactly know what's happening with the background screening process before they're onboarded, that's a really scary time, and it can really negatively affect not only the employer brand, but how companies feel about the organization they might be working for.
Yeah, absolutely. And then if we look at onboarding as just, process, as if you're doing your taxes, we completely miss that opportunity to understand, like, you are continuing to engage that person that you just probably spent months and a lot of money attracting and then engaging and getting them to accept an offer. And now they're on board, and, what's the onboarding experience like? And it's another opportunity to be able to continue to engage them, assure them they made the right decision, and really make that an experience and not just a process.
Absolutely. So new challenges, new pressures, new strategies and opportunities and a framework, and also new responsibilities for the talent acquisition leader. And I'm going to kind of throw something out there. I think that it's interesting because we're seeing so many titles in talent acquisition now, everything from data scientists to digital specialists, candidate experience managers. And I think it's exciting, and it's, offering a lot of opportunities for companies. But at the same time, I think it's creating some confusion. Companies are not sure if they need to kind of build all these skills themselves, go out and buy these skills, if they need to think about having the same exact talent acquisition structure. And it's certainly true when you think about the topic of marketing in general. Do we need dedicated marketing specialists on our talent acquisition team? Mm-hmm. And the point that I'll make here, and it's probably not consistent with some of the views some people might be hearing out there in the market, is that I don't think you necessarily need to revamp your talent acquisition team to be a marketing function. I think you need to think about what the challenges your company is facing, where you need help and support, how technology can help and support you, and then the resources you need internally to make sure that technology is getting adopted and it's improving efficiency within your company.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. I think it takes a high degree of, I call it company self-awareness, and for the company to be really aware of what they are and what they're not, and being able to understand what is the problem that we need to solve here from a talent perspective of who we need to get on board in order to move our organization forward. And I think that when you can focus on on that, on your target audience, on the talent that you need, on the people that you need to be able to move your organization forward, and you focus on their needs. What are the ways that we're going to be able to attract them? What are the kinds of messaging, the communication vehicles, just all of those different pieces that specific target audience needs in order to be able to get in front of them with the right messaging at the right time and bring them on board. And then to be able to say, what do we actually have here as a group, and what skills do we have as a group, and where do we need to partner, and where do we need to choose smart partnerships to make sure that the areas that we're lacking, not that we then try to rebuild it, but that we can have partnerships and we can have other folks that can support us, just to make sure that we're providing the experience for the specific target audience. I think that's where you always start. And I mean, for the companies that we work for, there's probably every model out there, and job title. My favorite job title is actually talent community manager. That's my favorite one. But but we see the entire spectrum of where we've got clients that have spent the time and money and effort and have completely built a talent marketing function within talent acquisition. Sometimes it sits within marketing. We've got other companies that it's like a hybrid approach, and they've got some folks that have marketing capabilities, and then they partner with organizations that have expertise. And then we've got companies that completely outsource every piece of it. So there's no one answer. It's just what's the fit for your organization and your specific target audiences.
And there was, I know we're doing questions at the end, but a question came up about, do we have, if you have a small relationship or even no relationship between marketing and HR or talent, what do you do in that situation, either to outsource it, or what are some ways, and I know you work on this a lot, to kind of bridge that gap if there's a lack of relationship there?
Interestingly, one of the ways that we have helped organizations bridge that gap quite a bit is through kind of branding exercises, or often what we call reputation exercises. And it's having talent acquisition leaders being able to bring data to marketing that actually shows that their reputation, how people are speaking about the company as an employer, the kind of information that they're sharing out there, just talking about their job, excited, not excited, that it's actually specifically impacting them from an overall marketing perspective. When you show that kind of data to say, here's kind of the volume of people that are out there talking about us, talking about our brand, and yes, they're talking about what it's like to work for us, but there's a tremendous amount of conversation that's happening. This is absolutely impacting our consumer marketing, and we need to marry those two things together and make sure that they're aligned and that we've got similar goals and we're working together. I've often seen that that's one of the most effective ways to get marketing or corporate comms ears to perk up and to listen, because they're often not looking at what's happening from a branding perspective through that lens, through more of the employer branding kind of lens. And when you can bring that type of data, and also, some of the more the research-based data that's out there that specifically shows, that your employer brand and your reputation in the market has an impact on your bottom line. I think that's really what gets people listening and willing to start to have a conversation, and just inviting them into, meetings that are sort of about employer brand or anything that is branding based.
Yep, absolutely. That's great advice. So lots changed in the past year. I think we're becoming more savvy about what roles we need for our company, how to think about this idea of talent marketing extending beyond just engaging with someone before they apply for a job, how to make that extending through the onboarding process, all this pressure we're facing with new technology and the gig economy. But unfortunately, a lot of the challenges that recruiters face are still the same challenges that they've faced in the past.
Yeah, absolutely.
And when we ask recruiters where they're spending most of the time, and this is amazing to me because I'm going to focus on the scheduling piece right now, is how much time is spent for scheduling. Not only resources on the talent acquisition team dedicated to just scheduling calls and scheduling interviews, but also the amount of time and frustration. I was talking to a candidate the other day, and they were turned off to a company because the scheduling process took almost a week, which should have been so simple. And there's no necessarily quick fix to this either. A lot of times the frustration can be with the hiring managers if they're blocking out their full calendar, regardless of all the great tools that you might be using, and you don't necessarily have access to that. So scheduling is a big piece that I think needs to get tackled in the next year for companies. And Shannon, I know you talk with a lot of the clients you work with on the scheduling piece specifically.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, to your point, it is something that absolutely impacts the candidate's perception of the company. They very much view this entire process as a window into what their employee experience is going to be like. And so if there's trouble even getting, on the calendar before you even walk in the door, imagine what it's going to be like once you're actually an employee. And so this is something, and that's a lot of what we're going to talk about, is that these are all pieces that are being, if not solved, being dramatically improved with technology. And I think that that's really what we have to focus on, is the more things change, the more they absolutely stay the same. We talked about at the beginning, it's the fundamentals of this process that are going to stay the same. And we just have to figure out ways to be able to use technology, marketing automation, what is available today from a data perspective, to make all of this more streamlined and more efficient.
Yeah, and I think when that happens, you can see right here that this was really interesting to me, because this is research we did 2016 and then 2018, and we asked the same questions, and companies are actually getting worse in how they communicate with candidates than better. And I think the reason is because we're focused on all of these areas that are not necessarily creating a better experience for candidates. They're just making sure that, we're doing what we have to do. And when things like scheduling doesn't work, when we don't necessarily have the right tools in place to be able to communicate with candidates, we're not able to improve the candidate experience. And that's essentially what communication is. It's an experience.
Yep.
So this was interesting to me. And I think that, a lot of the trends we're going to talk about now are related to this idea of a better communication style with candidates.
Yeah, and I think the one that really jumps out at me is that I can't believe that we've actually fallen so much on transparency on applicant status. Right? We've talked about the black hole of the application. It feels like forever. As long as ATSs have existed, we've talked about the black hole of an application. And to see that in the last 2 years, we've actually gotten worse in terms of being able to communicate and let somebody know where they are in the process, I think is mind-boggling, especially because technology has gotten better in this area. And so I think we've just got to marry these two things together to how can we use the tools that are out there in the most efficient way possible. And I know we're going to talk a bit about AI here, but I also think the rise of not just AI, but how you can smartly use things like chatbots to be able to give transparency on things like applicant status, things that you can train technology to be able to provide information back to candidates using that in a really smart way. The latest research on AI in terms of recruiting, and even chatbots specifically, are showing that candidates don't care if they're speaking with a human or they're speaking with a bot, as long as they get the right information. So if a bot is able to schedule an interview for them, fantastic. If a bot is able to say, here's where you are in the your application status, great. They didn't need to get that from a human. They just need the information. So
right.
Yep.
Great. And then, just going along with this theme of still some things have not changed much in talent acquisition. You can see 1 in 4 companies have a talent acquisition strategy that's not that. Only 1 in 4 have a talent acquisition strategy that's mobile optimized, which is amazing because we talk about mobile all the time. 22% of companies have a program for hiring military veterans. 7% of companies were prepared for GDPR this year. And then 1 in 2 companies still do not have an employee referral program. And we talked about that too. So a lot that needs to still happen in terms of moving talent acquisition forward.
Yep, absolutely. So let's jump into
That's a look back. Now let's talk about a look ahead and talk about and kind of dig into some of these trends. And the first one is really thinking about this idea of partnership. I think, we talk about this for a long time, but it's these relationships that companies have with the technology providers that they're using, and they need to be more of a partnership. And I think we're certainly seeing examples of that, but the more that companies can look for partners and not providers, the more success they're going to have from technology. And Shannon, we've talked a lot about the combination of technology, services, and for the talent marketing piece, the creative side too, and the benefits that provides customers because you have a partner that knows and understands how to make you successful.
Yeah, absolutely. We often talk about the technology as the engine, but if you don't have the creative, the story, and the partnerships and the expertise really that let you understand how your target audiences want to communicate, the kinds of touch points that, from a data perspective that we know are really working, that we're getting the responses that we need. If you don't have those pieces, like those are the gas, that's what's actually going to make your engine work. And so at the end of the day, if all you have is a beautiful engine, if you've got a beautiful ATS, but you actually don't have all of the pieces to be able to leverage the functionality that's within it in order to really make it go, then all it is a pretty technology stack, but it's not actually doing anything for you. And you truly need the partnerships and the expertise. And I think that goes back to what we were saying before of being really self-aware as a company and understanding who you are as a company, where you want to go, who you need to attract, and then knowing, do we have those core competencies in-house, or do we need strong partnerships to be able to get that done?
Yeah, there's a lot of work that needs to happen before making an investment in a partner. And I think too often we're looking for quick fixes as companies and looking for a solution. And it's understandable given all this new pressure that we face. But if you can take the time and take a couple steps back and really figure out exactly what you're talking about in terms of what your own priorities are and what the resources you might need in-house, the more successful it's going to be for your relationship with providers.
Absolutely. I mean, the amount of times that we get the phone call of, we're hearing from our business partner in this area of the company that we need to completely revolutionize the candidate experience over technology because it's not what they expect of us. And we know that takes a long time, but we need a new plan in a half hour. Like that's just, there's all of these different pieces of how fast things need to happen and how much work needs to go into it. But there's a lot of pressure to be able to make all of this happen really fast. And so you need to ensure that you're choosing the right partners and that people have the right expertise to be able to help you move as quickly as your business might need to.
Yep. So some of the trends we're going to dive into here, greater simplicity. We've talked about how complex talent acquisition has become. And I think a lot of the technology, especially around talent marketing, is amazing in how it can help companies improve the candidate experience, drive efficiencies, make better decisions, save money. But a lot of the technology is really complicated, I think, for talent acquisition to be able to implement and adopt. So how can we think about creating simplicity around those technology investments? How can we think about this idea of investing in recruitment marketing and making it something that's improving all of talent acquisition, not just something that happens up front? We'll talk about strategies for candidate communication, how to use data, especially around this topic of AI and chatbots and all the buzzwords these days to drive in. And then we'll close up with talking about thinking about the candidate and not just having a traditional view, but a broader view, because that's the workforce that we have today. So the talent acquisition trifecta, we call this trifecta the combination of the candidate relationship management, recruitment marketing, the ATS, and the onboarding system. And the component that I think is really important to call out here and where companies really need to think about focusing is the ecosystem. There's not a lot of areas, I think, where an ecosystem is as strong as it is in talent acquisition. A lot of companies we talk to that have had an ATS in place, for years and years and have not been super thrilled with it, have really relied on the ecosystem to be able to support them and help them innovate and help them provide things like communication and personalization that they can't get from their traditional systems. So as this tech market unfolds, this is what we really like to think about as the tech stack moving forward. It's this trifecta, and then being really thoughtful about the ecosystem that's going to integrate with these providers.
And I mean, what I like about this in terms of we're talking about it in terms of looking at it as the acquisition stage, but one, it's using candidate relationship management and the idea of using data, the database, the profile of the candidate, and having that as one of the main legs of this overall system so that you can use that information to be able to power that candidate experience before we ever get them into the applicant tracking system. It felt like for years before really the rise of CRMs in this space, the only place that we had was the file cabinet of the ATS, and that was often the only purpose that it served. And so you didn't have any of the, you'd have all of these touch points with candidates and spend all of this money on marketing, to get in front of them again and again and again, and that information was never in a place where it was databased until someone took the next step to be able to apply. And so to now have this other piece of the CRM that is now such an important part of the trifecta, where it's that stage before they actually apply, and we can house all of that profile information, and we can use that to make sure that our touch points are even more impactful, more relevant to the person before they ever get into the ATS. And then I love that we're including the onboarding system too, because that experience doesn't stop the day that they get their offer letter. Oh, this is great.
Yeah, and the CRM is interesting. One point I just make there is that it's not optional anymore. It used to be optional for a long time, especially for enterprise companies, where some would have a CRM, some would want a CRM, but you could take it or leave it. Now it's not. It's certainly a critical part of a talent acquisition technology strategy, and most enterprise companies, if they don't have one in place, are looking at them right now. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And so much of it too is just because of like the automation that can be built off of it, as well as the profile information that can then be used to improve the candidate experience. I think that's really one of the biggest overall trends, is that it is about being able to personalize that experience to your target audience. And if you don't have that information or that data stored anywhere, then you're kind of handicapped. You're not really being able to do that the right way. But there's so much. There's also kind of the integration and the partnership between the now required CRM and the applicant tracking system, so that those two pieces can even speak to each other, so that the CRM knows an application status, and it's able to send out communications that is informed by, here's the applicant's status, and it can send out the right communications, the right touch points based upon where somebody is in the process. I think that the integration of that too is what we'll continue to see a lot of work in, even after they actually bring one on board. Yep.
Yeah, and so, kind of along those lines of the tech stack and what it looks like, when we ask companies where they're investing in for the next year, it's employer branding, assessments, campus recruiting, and internal mobility. And again, I think going back to our first piece of this conversation, it's the fundamentals. It's how can we think about having branding, and I think every company understands the impact of a strong employer brand on their talent acquisition efforts. Assessments, I think a lot of that's being driven by this conversation around AI, and how can we think about having more science and less bias in the process? How can we use solutions to help us make better decisions? Campus recruiting, and then internal mobility.
Yep, absolutely.
When we ask companies where they're spending the majority of their budget, you can still see here it's background screening, ATS, and assessments. And I think that's so interesting. And a lot of people are pretty surprised by that. And the interesting point I'll make here, and this is just around technology, so it's not necessarily around the agency costs, but it's you can see here that the recruitment marketing CRM spend is not still anywhere near what the background screening ATS spend is for a lot of companies.
Yep. And because I have sort of a more limited lens with what we do at Symphony Talent, we don't do background checking, so I don't see kind of that piece or that focus on it as much. But we're still really seeing kind of the majority of our clients from a where is their budget going to go perspective. If we dive into the recruitment piece specifically, they're still just very focused on employer branding, and even the more efficient use of media. And even understanding ways that they can automate their marketing, understanding what are the touch points, and when do we need to market to our target audience? How do we then make our career website even better? That's really, again, sort of the fundamentals that they're still focused on: the branding, efficient use of media, the marketing automation. It's the more they change, the more they stay the same, as you say.
Exactly. Yay. Awesome. And then you can see here, I think kind of to our point earlier, it's this is table stakes now. It's not something that's optional anymore. Companies are investing in CRM, they're increasing their investment, and there's a lot of value there. The CRM does what the ATS has never been able to do, and that's okay. And I think for a lot of companies, it's taken the pressure off of what their expectations have been for the ATS. So what I see happening as companies think about continuing to invest in CRM is really being thoughtful about the providers they're thinking about, the providers that they're making investments in, and especially for those enterprise companies that might be on this call today, you need a provider that truly can support you, has the resources, is an established provider, has a financial viability to be able to support your company and to provide what we call the three most important things: the expertise, the experience, and to ensure that these solutions are going to be adopted, because it's going to require a little bit of change management for a lot of companies out there.
Yeah, I think your adoption piece is absolutely right on. I mean, we could be doing this a year from now, and we could be saying that now most companies have a CRM the way that all companies have an ATS, but they only use 3% of it. Of the functionality. The same model could hold true if you don't have those right partnerships, you don't have the expertise to really be able to use the CRM to its full potential and to get the most efficiency out of it as possible.
And the other point that I'd make there too with the adoption piece is if your company is having a hard time adopting your CRM or your recruitment marketing platform, work with your provider to be able to not only make it more simple for your organization, but also figure out the right capabilities your company needs. I think the challenge with a lot of these systems is they do a lot. They do a lot, and it's hard to know what your company is going to need in terms of those capabilities. And you don't necessarily have to start out using everything, but start out with what you need and what's working and build from there. But the worst thing that can happen, and this certainly happened in kind of the first generation of CRM recruitment marketing platforms, is companies were overwhelmed by all of the product and all of the capabilities that they didn't use it at all.
Yeah.
And that's certainly the worst case scenario.
Absolutely. And I think one of the biggest trends that we're seeing on our side in terms of, because there's kind of two sides of the coin with CRM, there's how you can use it from a sourcing perspective and having it be your sourcing database. But it's also just the housing of the candidate data, not the applicant data, and how you can use that to power and make all of your pieces so much smarter. Like we see consistently that when we have clients that use data out of their CRM, they use the candidate profile information to be able to personalize the experience on the career website, right? So for example, I live in your CRM. When I come to your site, you already know me. You know my name. You can say hi to me by name. You already know potentially what's in my resume. You know what job areas I'm interested in. There might be other interests and pieces of data that you have about me that there's no reason why I should have to start at a homepage that is the homepage that everybody sees. You can actually deliver to me, hi Shannon, here's the last thing that you were looking at. Here's an article that we just wrote, or a blog post that's out there, or a video from one of our employees who's in technology or marketing at our organization. We know that this is what you're interested in. You can provide a really personalized experience if you use the CRM from that perspective. And we see for clients that are doing that, that from a conversion perspective, the applicants that are then going forward and actually applying, we see increases in conversion rates of like 45 to 60% increases. So really make sure that you're thinking about the full capabilities, not just from a sourcing perspective, but how you can then use that data to really personalize the experience for your candidates and make it a much smarter experience.
I love that. I mean, that really resonates with me, how you describe it as, there are multiple uses for it, which I think we know, but it can be used as a sourcing mechanism, which I think is how we think about a CRM traditionally, but also can we use that data to personalize and engage candidates and provide a more meaningful experience. And we can do and should be able to do both of those things.
Yep, absolutely. All right.
So speaking of personalizing the experience, I think this is interesting data that we found, and this is live internet data with the number of emails that are sent out every second, and you can see only 40% of candidates are even reading their email. Shannon, we talk a lot about this, and it's the point that I want to make here. I think there's a couple points we want to make here. One is that we're not doing an effective job in communication. I think we know that from the research. We know that from our experience with candidates. And it doesn't mean necessarily that email is a bad thing and something we shouldn't do. I think it means two things. One, we need to do a better job of personalizing our emails, do a better job of whether it's templates you're using in whatever system you're using, or the way that you're crafting the emails to make them more personal is certainly one approach. And then also using other modes of communication, going where your candidates live. Is that video? Is that on social media? Is that through text? Is that through phone? Is that where are your candidates spending their time, and communicate with them on those channels?
Exactly. And that goes back to what we said at the very beginning in terms of being very self-aware as a company. You have to understand who you need, and you have to understand that person's interests, how they prefer to communicate, the channels that they want to use. And often, if you're a large enterprise organization, you are probably answering to many different types of candidates. You have folks that are fine with email as long as you've done it in a personalized way where the content is actually relevant to them. But you might have other candidates that they would actually just prefer to text or to chat or to use something like Facebook Messenger. And being able to understand what you put in place should be completely based upon your audience and their preferences so that you can hopefully get in front of them in the way that they prefer.
Right.
Yeah. AI.
It would not be a trends webinar if we were not talking about AI. And it's not a coincidence. I'm getting choked up just as we get here. But it's interesting. I think what's been so interesting to me about this year and thinking about next year is there's a lot that's happened in terms of AI in the broader universe and not a ton in talent acquisition. I think companies are still so confused. I mean, I remember the Symphony webinar that we did over a year ago at this point around AI, and a lot of the themes that we talked about then I think are still really relevant. Companies are still confused. There's too many providers out there that don't truly have AI and don't have integrity with the way they're talking about AI, and that's a problem. And I think companies still need use cases for how they can use AI within talent acquisition. The one thing I do think has changed is the conversation around bots. I think we're very comfortable with bots as consumers. I think we're comfortable with using bots in the candidate experience. And I think a lot of companies recognize that it can be very positive. That's the one shift I've really seen.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that this is going to be one of those areas that it's also growing so quickly that it becomes, there are many different ways to be able to apply AI across the spectrum of what we're doing from a recruiting perspective. Bots in terms of what I call candidate care, right? Of how you can automate candidate care in a way to be able to make it faster and more efficient for the candidate. But we also know AI is completely coming into even the media space in terms of how we're using systems that learn as we go to make sure that your media is more automated, that the budgeting is happening in an automated way, that you're maximizing ROI because we're actually using systems that learn as it goes and takes kind of decisions off of the plates of humans. So it can go faster and it can be smarter. But AI is also being incorporated, into CRMs, and we're seeing that technology enable recruiters to really focus on kind of top candidates that meet a certain profile that they're recruiting for, and it's able to help them recruit even faster. But of course, it's all new, and so there's still a little, there are questions to have to be answered around the technology. They're the candidates the technology brings to the top. Are they really the best, or is a human better? So I think there's still so many conversations that are happening in AI, but it's then getting incorporated into so many different things. It's going to grow incredibly quickly, and I think we've got to again focus on your target audience. What do they need and what are ways to be able to use AI in a smart way to meet their needs, as well as to make your recruiters even more efficient. But it is more than a buzzword.
It's definitely more than a buzzword. And I think two things you said that I think are important to think about for next year. I think one is you talk about these capabilities becoming embedded in the systems we're already using, whether it's CRM or even a lot of the media. And I think that's going to be more and more true in the next year. I don't think there's going to be as much of a market of standalone AI solutions anymore. We're going to see providers out there, our existing providers, including AI capabilities, not separate AI, solutions out there within what we're doing. And we're going to become more and more comfortable and familiar with, the role AI plays in talent acquisition. And I think the other thing you said is, should AI be making the decision? Should the recruiter be making the decision? Ultimately, your recruiting teams and hiring managers are making those decisions. Oftentimes as a hiring manager, you're giving the best information you can through AI and through the recommendations and through the data that you have and the machine learning for ultimately hiring managers to make decisions around the talent. And that's the value. I think it's not necessarily this one or the other, which we've thought about for so long, humans versus AI. It's the working together and understanding the value AI has in helping you make the best decisions.
Right. It can help you sort through the noise so the humans can focus on the signal.
Right. Love it. Just some data here on where companies, when we ask them where they're using AI in the recruitment process, screening the resume, communicating with candidates, lifting the administrative burden, converting leads to applicants. I think exactly what you just said too. It's helping them see that signal. I think all of these examples speak to that. Let's talk about internal mobility. This is a huge topic. We could talk about this for a webinar in itself. But Shannon, what I want to talk about is the talent marketing topic that we talked about earlier, and really talk about internal mobility and the role it plays in this idea of talent marketing, not just recruitment marketing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, again, we talk about all of the time and effort that goes into getting an employee to begin with, finding somebody that's a match, getting them on board, getting them engaged. And without a real internal mobility program that is just as thoughtful as the program that has gone into talent acquisition, we're almost kind of just stunting the whole process. And instead, we need to be thinking about internal mobility and investing in internal mobility with our current employees as well, so that we can ensure that the experience that they had coming on board is something that they can continue to have internally to look for other opportunities that might help them to develop, make sure that that's done in a very seamless way, in a frictionless way. And the other piece of this too is that we constantly, I'd said this at the beginning, we want to ensure that from a talent marketing perspective, the experiences that we're creating for an existing employee, that we're encouraging them to really be our best brand advocates or our best employee advocates. Because if they're out there continuing to sing the praises of what it's like to work for you as an organization and that they truly enjoy their job, and even if they got to a point where they felt like they were hitting a bit of a wall and they needed to do something different, but they had the kind of internal mobility resources to be able to then continue to move through the organization and stay with the organization, and they're out there talking about that, the byproduct of that is going to be recruiting. More people are going to want to come work for that organization because that's the kind of experience they want with work as well. So I think investing here is extremely smart, but we really need to see it kind of happen in both places, of taking the focus that it feels like has been on the candidate experience for over a decade. We really have to start thinking about not just that, but also the employee experience. And so that's why we think of it as more of overall talent marketing now. It's not just about recruitment experiences. So those are our trends.
I can't believe we finished in under an hour. I feel like we could have gone on for many, many hours. So I think we did good in getting through a lot of really exciting trends for the next year. And I know we have a few questions.
Yeah, let's go through, looking through some of our questions. I think, and I don't know if you've got a point of view on this, Madeline, if you've heard this in, in some of your research, but one of the questions that came through was, how is Google's investment in talent acquisition going to impact recruiting? I think that's on a lot of people's minds, and we didn't really call out Google as a trend per se. But, I'm interested, is this something that you're kind of seeing in terms of research and what organizations are thinking about? I certainly have kind of a point of view around their involvement too, but.
Yeah, I'll take the first stab, and then I'd love to hear your thoughts on it too. But I think first of all, it's a great question, and I think it's such a relevant and important question for anybody to be thinking about. And I think where we're seeing the biggest impact, and I would call it disruption, because I think we haven't seen a ton of disruption in the space, and Google has definitely disrupted the space with Google for Jobs, and I think that impacts a lot of the recruitment marketing and CRM efforts that companies are thinking about. But I think we're going to continue to see all of this, basically Google for Jobs driving a lot of how companies think about marketing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so I think that there are two things that are happening that are really important. The first is just the Google for Jobs piece of where your job listings are, the way that they're now featuring them within the job search results. We know, again, the more things change, the more they stay the same. Job seekers start at Google. They start at search. It's where they begin kind of their journey most of the time. And so now that Google is actually bringing right at the top when somebody is doing a career kind of search, they're actually bringing jobs. What that means is it's forcing this situation where the first brand experience or the first employer brand experience that a candidate often has with you is a job description. And if you think about maybe some of the time and the money and the thought that has gone into your employer brand and maybe into your career website, often where that doesn't convey is all the way into your job description. And so when you've got this situation where most people's or most candidates' experiences are starting with a job description out of your ATS, I think it's forcing us to really start thinking about the idea of, if this is the only brand experience that somebody ever has with us, what can we actually do from a job description perspective to make that experience better? So not just what are the skills and experience you need to have, but how can we actually bring like stories into it? How can we bring photos into it? How can we bring video into it? How can we bring benefits information into it, to where a job description is almost acting as its own landing page unto itself? If that's the only page of your website that a candidate ever sees, we want to make sure that they can actually have a full experience versus them just going to a page and then leaving. And then I think the other thing that's getting impacted is Google getting into search on the action, like powering search on the actual career websites. Google's now using its search technology and becoming the search within career websites. And that's going to have a really big impact too, because the search technology is so much more advanced and it's smart, and it's able to translate a lot of company jargon into the type of language that employees use. And so I think we're going to see a really big positive impact there as well.
And that's where the ATS have done such a bad job, is the search, to be honest. It's and basic keyword search where companies can't find anyone in their database. So to be able to have Google operate as, a true search engine is a huge benefit. And the ATSs certainly will all be, and most of them are at this point too, partnering with Google.
Yeah. Well, that goes exactly to the point of the beginning of the conversation around understanding what your core competency is and what it's not. Google's core competency is search. And so that is a partnership that companies should be looking to be able to leverage and invest in, because it's going to enhance their candidate experience, better than just about any other company can, because it's not their core competency. It's not what ATSs were built to do, was to provide a great search experience. So, looking through some of the other questions, there was a question that had come through. I guess we can probably end on this with the time that we have left. But there was a question around what AI providers do you have good experience with, and what providers actually offer any added value. I don't want to necessarily go through a bunch of vendors. We could always talk offline about, either one of us vendors we've had experience with. But I think what's important from a trends perspective and what we're talking about on this webinar is I'd love for you to expand a little more, Madeline, on what you were saying, that these standalone providers around AI, I actually think that that's really short-lived and that's going to go away.
Yeah.
Right. And
yeah.
so, and I'm not saying don't have any partnerships with standalone AI providers, but I do think that it's more of looking at your existing technology stack and talking with your current partnerships and seeing where is AI on the roadmap, how is it being integrated into what you already have, how quickly is that coming, how might you be able to leverage it versus going out and trying to specifically go find someone that just deals in AI.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And I think there's a couple of reasons to be careful when you think about startups and AI. One is that you need to be a true AI provider with a lot of integrity around AI. You need to have a lot of data and experience with data. And a startup that has a great idea and can build an awesome algorithm doesn't necessarily have that data. And I think the other reason is because there's a lot of startups in this space, and this is a broader conversation, that have taken a lot of investment and often bit off more than they can chew. They might not necessarily be able to sustain in the next year or certainly 2 years with that amount of investment, with not necessarily being able to support an enterprise client or even a mid-market client. There's a lot of support you're going to need, not only with technology, but with all those things we talked about, with the services, with the partnership. And if you have a provider that just has 2-3 people working there, and then a staff that is focused on sales and marketing, they're not going to be able to come in and support your organization, and that's a concern.
Yep, absolutely. Well, I think that's all that we have time for. We're absolutely at our mark here. So thank you so much. This was a great conversation. We'll have to do a part 2 next year.
I know. We'll have to see if any of this came true.
Madeline and Shannon, thank you so much for joining us today. For those who put questions in the queue and we weren't able to get to it, we will reach out to you individually to answer your questions. And this webinar will be available on demand on our website within the next few days. So again, we thank you all and have a great afternoon.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.